Hello and welcome to the Beyond Podcast. And this discussing episode, I have a wonderful guest with me. We are recording as ever in our secret London location, where we have two cats in evidence who may make their opinions known. We are approaching treat time, and one of them is currently working their way through their breakfast. Anyway, we're going to have a discussion about genre. The question that we have as a modern producer is, what do we do with texts that are early modern or pre-modern, and how do we categorize them? Once upon a time, comedy and tragedy were enough, and then market economy came about and plays had to be in competition with one another, and so genres expanded and grew and got a little silly, and then 400 years passed, and the question of what we call a play, what we call a text, has varied depending on fashion, on period, and the question we're going to be trying to wrestle with today, me and my guest, is that question: can we sensibly apply a modern genre to an early modern text? Can I put on the website a section saying horror? And that is pretty much the genre that we're orbiting today with my special guest. Who are you and what is your purpose in life?
Hello, I'm Rebekah King, and I am a writer and a researcher, and I've just finished my PhD, which looked at the history of magic and its depiction on the early modern stage, particularly looking at, I guess, the history of who got to do magic, dangerous knowledge-seeking, and it's sort of, just before we get to science fiction, the figure of the magician is the figure, in whom all those questions about dangerous knowledge and the occult and seeking too far, going too far, they're all being explored. So there you go. That's my shtick. And I write a lot of articles on the history of horror, which is my favourite genre. And it's really lovely to be here today with a cat on my knee.
Yes, and it's very frustrating for me personally, because my genre of choice would be science fiction, but the early modern period doesn't give us a lot of leeway for that. And just outside of our period is when things really start ticking over. And so it's very frustrating for me. But horror is also interesting. So the term horror comes about, is very much a 20th century invention. It's very much associated with film rather than theatre. What is horror to you? Shall we define our terms before we start? What is horror?
You're not going to make me define my terms, are you?
Live on the podcast.
That's a really good question. I was thinking about this recently because I do a running series of articles called Horror Moments, which is where we look at the spiel of that is, it's basically, I look at horror moments in things that aren't horror. So I guess I'm having to make decisions there about what I think horror is. And I think it's more than it's not just tragedy, is it? It's not just something bad happens. It's not just someone dies. It's that the story is trying to get you to feel scared, to feel some kind of apprehension or tension, to explore things that I suppose are slightly taboo pushing, uncomfortable. Yeah, horrific. I don't know. It's how would you define horror? Chuck it back to you.
Well, if we leap to our period, I mean, the problem with horror is because it was associated with how you censor and classify films. That's where it comes about. This idea of what is horrific, what is too much for an audience to take, but it always was very vague as to what it meant. And you're mentioning it's not just tragedy, it's not just something bad happening. And I was discussing this with associate of the pod, Liza Graham, earlier, when we were going through our list. We have this very long list that we've sort of been playing around with, what fits, what doesn't. So if we pick a tragedy, if we picked, say, the Spanish tragedy by Thomas Kyd, what is horrific about that? Yes, there's some gore, there's some unpleasant things happen to people's bodies, but I think what's horrific for me about that play is actually there is no justice.
Yes.
And it's that tension about someone who believes in justice, whose job is justice, who loses his, not just family members, but loses his sanity, not so much because he loses his son and eventually his wife, spoilers, but because he cannot get justice for that. And that's what drives him. And I think what drives that play into the direction of horror.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know I'd necessarily categorize that one straightforwardly as that, but I think there is that element in there about something being just wrong about the world you live in. And it's not just that terrible things happen to him, or he does terrible things to himself. It's also that final scene in this, where they put on this play where everybody's speaking a different language, which, unhelpfully for us, the publisher decided to translate into English. But you have this moment at the end where everybody comes on speaking to many of the audience what would amount to gobbledygook, while murdering people in front of them, and everyone going politely applauding to the absurdity. That's an interesting test case.
It's disturbing, as well as just, I don't know, it's not just that bad things are happening, it's that, I wonder whether it's also partly to do with the effect on the audience, because what you were saying then makes me think a lot about the kind of cinema culture associated with horror films, right? You know, there's something special about being in a cinema and having this collective moment of catharsis where everybody laughs after the release of tension, or everyone screams or vomits, or people are walking out. And I think in some ways horror cinema is closer in creating a kind of theatre-like audience than other genres of cinema. And I wonder whether it's partly that we define horror through what the film or the play is trying to do to its audience. And it's partly kind of provoking them, upsetting them, disturbing them.
Yeah, and the way that horror cinema has frequently functioned in terms of the way it sells itself has always been has often been on the more schlocky end of the spectrum. And our understanding of how, say, Elizabethan drama functioned was this much more populist, much more in your face kind of way of producing texts and shows that sort of speaks to that. You know, I can see a William Castle in the Elizabethan period.
Absolutely.
Doing you will never guess what happens in the, you know, or you'll be the most scared. I mean, I can't see them putting electric buzzers under seats or anything, but
Emergo.
Yeah.
Emergo is okay. So for any listeners who don't know, you should Google...
Yes, we are an early modern podcast, and we're going to be diving into horror things that horror people will know instinctively what we're talking about.
I'm definitely going to write an article about Emergo at some point, because and actually that's a fun moment where you think, you're sort of trying to do theatre here in a cinema. So basically, it's House on Haunted Hill, isn't it? There's a sequence where, this is kind of a spoiler, but there's a sequence where a skeleton walks... and is marionetted essentially across the room. And this director, William Castle, he had this idea that there should be the skeleton should appear in the cinema, and that when you were watching the film, there would suddenly be this kind of quite ludicrous looking skeleton wobbling across the screen all of a sudden in front of the actual skeleton in the film. So that's a weird example of how horror cinema is trying to get a rise out of an audience in a way that, you know, sort of putting the horror in the room with them, like the theatre can. Yeah. Yes, he would have absolutely loved early modern theatres where you could fire cannons and have people running on with squibs and do all sorts of dangerous things that were sort of gimmicks, you know, to get a reaction from the audience. And
there's a William Castle quality, I think, to the stories about Dr. Faustus. So you have that story of there's an extra devil in the cast in Exeter.
Yes, great story.
And there's part of me going...
Marketing.
How much
I think it's marketing.
It's marketing, isn't it?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
William Castle would and other directors did similar, but would say, you know, we've got nurses on hand for anyone who faints, and those kind of elements of saying it's so scary, you mustn't go alone, i.e. book as many tickets as you can, and that kind of logic. And Dr. Faustus is perhaps the entry point for a lot of people in this kind of convergence.
Yes, absolutely.
Of something that overtly supernatural, not the horror has to be supernatural, but that's one of the sort of vectors. There are demons. There are moments of genuine terror, at least for the character. Whether the audience felt terror in the early modern period, I don't know. We can't be certain.
I think this also goes to something about so there's something worth saying about the frisson of magic in the early modern theatre, which I do think is something we've slightly lost in cinema. It's actually something I think the theatre can do better, which is if you've got someone performing an incantation in front of you for real, even the greatest atheist skeptic might feel a little bit like, ooh, it might something be listening. This feels quite powerful. And I'm working on some stuff at the moment actually about the overlap between the instructions that were written for magicians, teaching them how to command demons, and the instructions that actors have been given through the years, how to command your audience. So there's something about being in the space. I think even today, there was a play at the Fringe recently that staged kind of a seance. They had these headphones where you could hear, footsteps going around you in the ring, and there's just something about that we're still a bit freaked out by the occult, and I think theatrical spaces have always exploited that, especially in the early modern period. So I do think people would have felt that story about people counting one devil too many running around in Dr. Faustus. I think there would have been a real sense of tension. We are actually physically embodying everything that a magician embodies when he's performing a ritual. So what if there is some kind of, what if the devil might rise up out of the theatre like he does in the Black Book, as Middleton describes? Yeah, so I think that's actually something theatre can do better than cinema, and something we haven't quite learned to recapture yet.
And it's also a text that isn't afraid of comedy. I mean, that actually, for all this idea of unnerving people, of something to scare you, and I think the question of is horror scary is a slightly a bit of a red herring. But that there is also humour to break those tension points. And Dr. Faustus is structured that way. And it's often been a criticism for it, that it has these quite random comedy moments, all of which come from the source material. I mean, it is actually a very faithful adaptation in many ways. In fact, it misses a trick. There's a bit in the book they should... I don't know why they didn't stage it, because it's so brilliant.
Which bit?
In the original book... when he's dining with students, he obsessively won't let them stop. The party cannot stop.
Right.
Really nice sense of this desperate man desperately trying to keep the fun running, because the moment it stops, he has to think about he's going to be damned.
Yeah.
And he invites them over for dinner well into Lent. So it's like, again, it's that slightly unnerving quality. There's this bit where he serves them, I think, is it a hog's head or a lamb's head? There's an animal's head is served, and the animal's head screams, "They're going to kill me, they're going to eat me, help me, help me!" And the students, assuming that this is all some weird, he's just pranking us, eat the animal as it's screaming.
Ooh.
And you think on the psychological level, that's like his subconscious is conjuring the animal. And also this image of them gorging on the floor. And it's just like, I'm so putting that in a production one day. Because it's a missed trick, actually, of so much that they put in the book into the play. And so much they drop as well. I mean, there's an awful lot of really not very funny jest book material in the source.
I wonder whether that's partly to do with, I wonder how you'd stage that. I mean, we know from, say, Friar Bacon, Friar Bungay, that you could have quite elaborate sort of puppet type special effects. I wonder if it was partly just kind of...
you've got a dragon, you're not getting anything else.
Yeah, that's just a bit of a faff, let's adjust it. And
Well, the fact we have two different versions of Faustus, the sort of expanded full-fat version...
Which is more spectacular and more gory as well. Talking about horror, one of the things that's dialed up in that second edition in the B text is him being torn apart, right, at the end. So you don't just get a sort of obscene, off-scene, hidden...
Oh, it's so sad.
Yes, how awful, what happened to him. You actually, there's a bit more awful.
Yes, and that, again, that's from the book, is that, in the book, it's very much like a horror text, in the sense that he's behind the door, you can hear the screamings and the bangings, and it's the kind of thing you can't really stage, but if you were making a film, you would leap at that material and go, that's what you'd use. Now, you mentioned Friar Bacon and Friar Bungay and its sequel, a pseudo-sequel thing, which are much lighter. I mean... Again, they feature magic.
Yes.
They feature elements of the uncanny. There is a big talking head. But would we put them in that... If you were in the audience and you'd been sold that,
as a horror.
would you want your money back?
It's much more of it was basically a romance, isn't it, where magic solves the issues for the lovers and all their entanglements. But I think that's an interesting one, because I think the scariest scene in it, which is this brazen head. So obviously Friar Bacon is trying to encircle the country in a wall of brass so that it's very difficult for Britain to be invaded.
Yes, cannons everywhere.
Yes, exactly. And he's using this kind of magical talking head to find out the secrets, the occult secrets that will allow him to do this. And but it's a comic. It's kind of a scary scene. It could be quite frightening. I think you could do a brilliant talking head, because it sort of wakes up. Time was. You can imagine, it's almost like the Wizard of Oz, that scene where you go in and there's this big booming face, and you can imagine that being done brilliantly and in a quite spine-tingling way. But it's taken so long for the head to speak that the only person who's awake and paying attention is Miles, who is the idiot servant boy, who completely messes it up, fails to realise what's going on and what he ought to do, and then the head kind of, spoilers, spontaneously bursts apart, is smashed apart by a mysterious hand that comes down with a hammer and hits it.
Yes, one of those many stage directions where you're going, how did they do that?
Oh, it's got so many good stage directions in that play, like enter Hercules carrying the dragon or the tree, and the dragon in the tree is spitting fire. Oh god, these are wonderful special effects, but it must have been some of these I think are written because they knew that they could do them. We can do a dragon effect, so bung a dragon in the play.
There are a number of big talking heads in plays, so the idea that we've got the prop, so you better, it's like the moment they get a chariot, it's like, it's got to be a chariot in every play.
Absolutely, yeah.
To get our money's worth.
Absolutely, yeah. It's exactly that. And actually, conjuration scenes in general, you get them bunged into plays where you probably don't need a conjuration scene.
And again, this is a hobby horse of mine, but just to point out that the early modern drama and medieval drama is not just people walking on stage, speechifying, then walking off again, and nothing visual that happens. These are often incredibly visually inventive shows. We know from inventories that they spend a lot of time and money making sure that something interesting is happening, and that visuals are actually important. Not to everyone and not to the same degree, but this idea that it's only about listening to the verse is a bit of a myth.
And there's a lot more music and improvisation around the spoken text than we perhaps give them credit for, these dramas. But I think also, so there's been some interesting work done on whether or not we think that early modern theatres had a kind of master of illusions attached. So somebody who was what we would call a magician, a sleight of hand magician, who could do tricks. And there were such people who were kind of licensed to go around, and they didn't claim to be real conjurers. It was, there was a distinction. But yeah, we think that there must have been people like that who were attached to the big theatres, who had the budget for it, who could maybe come in and, sort out some sort of exciting effect. That's something, again, that doesn't really survive if you're just reading that stage direction.
And in the same way as physical performers, acrobats, etc., who may be semi-connected to certain theatres, maybe theatre companies, depending on their scale. And again, that there are economies of scale depending on, again, the context in which you're performing. If you're on tour, and that's where it sort of feels like the Faustus A text feels like a touring script.
Yeah, absolutely.
And often people talk about certain plays being shorter and saying, it's for touring. And you then go, have you looked at the doubling? I think not. But that's one of the few where it's incredibly easy to stage with a small cast in a very practical way. And it feels like that's the iteration that went on tour.
Yes.
I don't think we should get into the textual complexities of the two different things and what they might mean, because some people start screaming at the podcast. But yeah, there are differences in what people are selling. And also, because we cover such a long period of time, the expectations of audiences change as well. So if we nip back to the medieval,
Yes.
Demons are perhaps even more scary than later on they may become, because, of course, we have theological shifts as to what meaning and where. I think we can assume that people have a greater belief in the supernatural generally, but within a biblical context, what are demons, what's Satan doing there is slightly different to what will happen to Satan and imps and demons later on. And this question of, medieval horror, the slaughter of the innocents plays are not necessarily, but they're pretty horrific. They're pretty dark.
Yeah, definitely.
And the one that I always feel is actually a psychological horror story is Abraham and Isaac.
Oh, yeah.
Because what is it? It's this guy who hears voices in his head who takes his son out to be sacrificed because that's what the voices tell him to do. And then he's saved last minute, and it's like... Yeah, you could reset that in a dungeon. And it's about perspective as well, isn't it? Because from Isaac's perspective, that it's just a pure horror plot. Yeah.
What if one day your father said to you, "God has told me that you need to die"? I mean, that's absolutely horrifying, terrifying.
Yeah, the best example of that is the Broom Abraham and Isaac play, which really plays up with the conversation between father and son of just. You know what, Dad? I don't think I'm going to see you holding a knife in quite the same way ever again. Let's.
Yeah.
And he sort of does the thing that you see in those kind of situations in modern films of just going, I'm going to humour the scary person and tell them what they want to hear because maybe I'll get away with my life at the end of this. And of course, we can always take this back to classical theatre. We can take it back to Seneca, Thyestes, and family pie eating.
Yes,
is again this really rather horrific image and idea woven into classical mythology and those ideas, and which a text is Thyestes is very alive and well in the Elizabethan. But then, if we go a little later. Into the Jacobean, when you get the impression that the spirit of Guignol is
hovering
alive and well of just how far can we push it, how much blood can we have, how dark, what taboos can we cross,
and again, there's a lovely connection here with the history of special effects, because you think of Tom Savini sort of coming to a director and going, I can do it like this. How cool! Look what I've done. And it's in some ways it's the cart leading the horse, because then you have to think of why the demon explodes into custard rather than whatever it might be. And it's because Tom Savini's found a really cool way of doing it. Or I remember there's a great Clive Barker quote where he says something like, "You shouldn't just put in special effects for the sake of it, but there is a special joy in a special effects guy coming to you and saying, I can turn someone inside out through the arsehole gov and I can do it for 50p or something like that." I think there's a lot of that in Jacobean drama, definitely. And it's partly to do with audience sensibilities, as it becomes more acceptable to push those taboos. You see, it's like it's all to do with censorship, where the line in the sand is of what we can get away with. And as soon as you can get away with more, audiences are more tolerant. You can kind of just feel that glee. What can we do? What can we show? How can this person die?
Yes, if we think of Elizabethan theatre being closer to, say, Hammer horror in the 50s, late 50s, when that begins. And then you think the Jacobean is when we hit the 70s.
Yeah, absolutely.
And suddenly there's blood everywhere,
boobs everywhere.
and sex.
Yeah.
I mean, "'Tis Pity She's a Whore" is a text where they really lean into the incest and they don't hang around with that, and then you end up with a very bloody ending that you're going, the prop master had fun with that one.
Yeah.
I say that, they probably just went down to the local butchers. That differential over time of just pushing those boundaries back and back and back, how much of that comes from the top and how much of that comes from... Because, they're inured to a degree on violence in a way that we're not, perhaps.
There's been some interesting work looking at the comparison between, what's it called? There's a great book. It's something like Pit, Stage and Stake and Scaffold. There's a great book that compares the stage and the bear baiting arenas, which were sometimes literally the same buildings, and the scaffold where you would go to see your public executions. And so there's sort of three forms of entertainment, and two of them are real death. And one of those real deaths forms of entertainment overlaps with the theatre. It's the cockpit and the bear garden. Yeah, you think even the smells that would linger around the theatrical space.
And is it also just a question of technology? I mean, you think there's the particularly nasty, horrific moments in a play like Cambyses back in the 1570s. You've got flaying, you've got archery practice on children. But you get the impression that that's probably quite primitive and designed to be toured. Whereas if you're one of the major London companies and you have an indoor playhouse where you might have a little bit more room for sleight of hand, there's nothing worse for magic than open light.
True. Although I think there were some big set pieces that I think I don't know actually whether we. Yeah, that's an interesting one because I'm thinking of Reginald Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft is a book that talks a lot about all the different. It's very sceptical and he's irritated by the fact that people are still witch hunting. But he also talks a lot about the reality of sleight of hand and its role in theatre. And he talks about false knives and how to make it look like someone's been beheaded. And I think some of those quite broad scale illusions would have happened in the broad daylight on the big stages. Perhaps more subtle illusions were better suited to the indoor theatres. I don't know. It's hard to tell sometimes.
There's a spate of hangings, I think, in the late 1590s on stage. Like, they figured out how to do a really good on-stage hanging. They don't tend to do beheadings because beheadings are really hard work.
And the
go
actual
off stage,
beheading.
come back with a head
with a
back.
plate. Yeah, that's the Reginald Scott trick is post decapitation, how you make it look like you've got a severed head on a table. Yes.
But because of the pure mechanics of doing that, and even doing that today. I mean, I am currently working on a project where we do need to behead someone, and it's a nightmare.
On stage.
Yeah.
In full view.
Yeah. It's not in the original text, but it's very important for us to behead someone for the nature of what we're doing.
There's quite a cool beheading effect that's sometimes done in Turandot. Or Turandot, however you want to...
I think it's Turandot.
People sometimes tell me it's Turandot, but
Really?
I've said Turandot always. Anyway, at the beginning when you have the other prince who's just failed the test being executed, I've seen some quite good versions where they've made it look like his head is coming off. And I think he's facing away from the audience, and so there's a kind of, and then he ducks his head down. Anyway, just for your, that's a good beheading effect I've seen on stage.
A good beheading. That's what we like. Now, we haven't really talked about, you mentioned in passing, witches. We obviously have a reasonably good selection of witch texts. The Witch by Thomas Middleton, featuring a violin-playing cat. The Witch of Edmonton, and the Late Lancashire Witches, or just the Witches of Lancaster, or Lancashire, or however you want to put it. All of which I think lean a lot more into that horror vibe, and into that whole almost folk horror vibe as well.
Very interesting term.
Because of you're looking at a society. Usually a rural society, and figures who are ostracized or utilizing their power, and whole universe. I mean, we don't really have time to go into how much we could say about what that's saying about then and now. But certainly that certainly with the film The Witch, relatively recently. It's still something that resonates and functions today.
Yes.
And I kind of feel that subsect is actually quite straightforwardly bracketed, and I don't think people would feel that they're getting shortchanged because, people do die quite brutally, and there is supernatural horror going on there.
Yeah, and it's quite fundamentally, there's something about there's something about the history of witch trials and witch hunting, whether you were a person who believed in them or not, there's just something very unsettling about the idea that this old lady has been potentially in league with the devil, but is now being tortured for it or tormented for it. Yes, so folk horror is really interesting at the moment because it's sort of a term that was popularised by Mark Gatiss quite recently in his horror documentaries, which are great. And he talks about how folk horror really describes, it comes from the unholy trinity, right, of films from the 70s. I think they were from the 70s. The Witchfinder General.
It was late 60s.
Yeah, okay, and...
I know that very well because I live in Lavender.
There you go.
Where they filmed...
Late 60s, early 70s. So we're around that time, and we've got Witchfinder General, we've got Blood on Satan's Claw, and we've got The Wicker Man. Those are the three. And all three of those are about a community gone wrong. And I think there's a slight split in folk horror now. There's been a revival of it since those three in the 70s. There's a kind of eco horror where you have this idea of the earth angry, that nature turning on us because we've been disrespecting it. It's almost like a sort of a pagan moral story. I think that's harder to trace, that's harder to see in the early modern period because we are living in a time of climate crisis unlike anything that the early modern people would have been thinking about. But the other branch of folk horror, which I think is actually what the original three, that unholy trinity, really about, it's about the horror of folk. It's about the horror of peoples who are remote, isolated, different in some way, and where there's some kind of something has come and poisoned a community, or somebody has come to a community and found it poisoned. Witchfinder General is about is exactly this. It's the story of a witchfinder.
It's entirely cynical.
Yeah, there's no real magic in it. It's about Matthew Hopkins going to a town and, through his own greed and zealotry and lust, targeting women, killing innocent people, and then it has a very bleak ending. The Wicker Man is all about a puritanical, Christian policeman who goes off to investigate what he thinks is a murder on a remote Scottish island, and then he finds they're all pagans and all sorts of strange things have been going on. And then Blood on Satan's Claw is about people at a little rural village where Satan gets dug out of a field and starts to corrupt the children of the village who help him collect pieces of skin to grow again, to kind of resume his full form. So all of those original films are about... It's not really about what we sometimes think of as the cliches of folk horror, creepy trees and, hares and, I don't know, people suckling crows. It's about the idea of your local community being suddenly being a frightening place, or going to a place where you are an outsider. And so that is absolutely what we see in those witch plays. It's about... what's Edmonton like? What's going on in Edmonton?
Everybody's horrible in Edmonton. All of the men are awful human beings. Well, with the one exception. And you're sort of going, well, of course she becomes a witch.
Yeah.
Of course she calls on Satan.
Get it.
Why wouldn't you?
And she's getting this strange affection from Satan that she's not getting from the devil, that she's not this familiar spirit that she's not getting from any of the people. You totally understand... Yeah, it's all about her isolation from the folk. The folk are frightening to her, I think. Yeah. So I think that aspect of folk horror absolutely very clearly maps onto those plays about witchcraft and the anxieties of what's going on in these rural communities.
And the Lancashire Witches is a really interesting one because it's based on a true story that hasn't finished yet at the time of writing.
Yeah.
So at the end of the play, you don't know what happens to the people who are called witches. And of course, in real life, they're just people. In the play, they definitely have magical powers, and they're really interesting magical powers. And there is some loss of limbs in the process of the text. So it's quite. It's really weird because it is both funny, but it's off in a really quite satisfying way. And then it doesn't end, per se.
Yeah.
And for the original audience, of course, it's this question of what happens, what's the news? Well, they all get acquitted. And that's not to say everything's fine, but it doesn't end in the way that... say, other true crime narratives, if we switch genre now to a play like Arden of Faversham, where everybody dies.
It's very much a resolved story, right?
Yes, because that happened 50 years prior to the play.
And true crime stories themselves, I think, are often split into those two types, right? The one that remains a mystery, the unsolved case, and you bring in all sorts of mad people to speculate wildly about what's happened, and then the ones that are, telling you every graphic detail that came out in the courtroom proceedings that then also administered justice. So I think, that again, you've got these two different branches of the same genre, both present in the early modern texts, I think.
And outside of plays, you mentioned the Black Book earlier, and we have other texts, and it's sort of trying to collect other interesting texts to do things with. I mean, the novel Beware the Cat by William Baldwin could be an Amicus portmanteau film.
Absolutely.
It absolutely could be. In fact, it kind of is. It's kind of the film The Uncanny, which is a pseudo-Amicus film, in the sense that there's this guy who tells you the cats are coming to get you, and then tells you all these stories about how cats are going to come and get you, and you get all those stories within it. And then it prefigures so many sort of gothic tales of, the Jekyll and Hyde Invisible Man quality of creating the potion and the things to hear the cats and understand them. It has all of those things that I absolutely latch onto for horror, as well as the comedy as well, because it's quite a funny
also
text.
The sheer excess of that, like Amicus and also the gothic genre. It's like you get as much horror for your money as possible in those stories. You pick up a novel like The Monk, every 3 pages something else, some other bizarre thing is happening. It's how much can we... It's quantity rather than quality of storytelling almost, I think, sometimes. And you see that in some of those early prosy texts that are being passed around. And we've gone and bought this printed text, we want to get our money's worth. So it's just got everything in the kitchen sink and lots of cats.
And hopefully very soon my one-man stage version will be out on tour. Hopefully by the time you hear this, there will be some news on me doing that in various venues.
Amazing.
But we shall see.
Well, you should. There's a new Amicus production company.
I have been thinking of giving it, if only to just chat about what we're talking about here, but in a very much more focused way. But we've also, got these other sort of true accounts of things. This idea of supernatural is real.
Yes.
A strange and terrible wonder about the black dog at Bungay, which is, I love it, but it's just clearly... There was a storm, someone had a heart attack, and there might have been a dog somewhere, and all this other stuff has been added to it, and it's like,
Yes. It's like the smallest grain of truth in there, and then...
and it's just like, who's going to check? Who's going to check?
You're not reading this because you really care about whether it's true or not. You're reading it because it's a good story.
Yes, and we are on that cusp of freedom of movement is enough that we almost have tourists. And the moment you have tourists, stories grow.
Yes, like every pub that invents a ghost so that they get a few more punters. Because, why not? It's a good story.
Come and stay in the haunted...
the witch's room. Well, and I love that overlap as well, because that goes back to what we said about how the rumours of the extra devil in Faustus feel like promotional... It feels like it's the same thing. Horror directors today. Even last year, the director of Terrifier 3, Damien Leone, was being accused of making up stories about people fainting in Terrifier 3, which is, for those who don't know, it's just deliberately gory. It's just gory set pieces, really. Art the Clown killing people in inventive ways, and very, very shocking gore, even for a modern audience. And I don't know that he did invent them, but again, that tension's always been there in these sort of texts all the way back to the beginning. Is this, do we get the whiff of promotional invention here? Probably yes.
Yeah. So I think we've certainly covered most of the text I've been thinking about. Is there anything you think we haven't really talked about where those boundaries of things that are just the weird and the eerie, as opposed which is sort of when I'm talking about Beware the Cat, it's not. It could be turned into a horror, but as a text, it's sort of supernatural, weird fiction rather than horror. Well, actually, no. There is one horror set piece in it when the cats go to the throat. But there are lots of those areas where the atmosphere matters. So you get the atmosphere and you put it in that direction. Or there's a set piece. The Merry Devil of Edmonton is not a horror.
Right.
It's got one scene that is supernatural and
absolutely.
Could be a bit, but the rest of it isn't.
Absolutely.
Fry Bacon and Fry Bungay, it's got one scene where it sort of goes there.
But even that's comic. And that's an interesting one because the carrying away to hell scene at the end, which in Faustus becomes this gory moment. It's as gory as possible. He's been torn to pieces. In Fry Bacon, Fry Bungay, it's played for laughs because Miles gets this demon turns up to carry Miles away, and he's like, "Do they have any tapsters in hell?" No. "Oh, I'll make a killing. People must be really thirsty in hell. It's so hot. I'm going to be a tapster. I'm going to absolutely... Right, off we go then. Come on. Right, I'm getting on your back. Off we go." And so it's a completely different... That's the tone of that play, yes.
Yeah. So supernatural doesn't automatically mean
horror.
horror.
No, not at all. No. So I suppose... So what this is making me think of is... I guess one thing that's been quite hard for modern theatrical productions to capture is some of the kind of precision of, I don't know, the atmosphere that you can make when you've got control of the camera and you can direct the eye. I'm thinking now of films like The Innocents, right? This sort of classic black and white horror film which is based on Turn of the Screw, where it's a haunted house story and there are lots of shots that are very frightening because they are so well set up. And it's harder to... It's always been hard, I think, for theatre to do that. That aspect of horror works better, I think, or is easier to do on film. Controlling the eye, doing the sort of thing. A thing is out of focus and then it's in focus all of a sudden. There was a great. I don't know if you saw Long Legs last year. This new horror film that came out.
I haven't
it's good fun. It's really good fun. And Osgood Perkins, the director, he's really good at using empty space. So in that first third of the film in particular, you keep having these frames where you are absolutely paranoid about this big sort of pregnant space that you feel like something's going to come out of that shadow. He never, the camera is playing tricks with you. So I'm thinking, okay, so what... We've talked about how you can do the true crime stuff's quite easy to do in early modern theatre. You can do lots of gore and fun effects. You can do supernatural stuff to varying degrees of seriousness. You can do folk horror, that feeling of people being scary. People turning on you, a community turning against you, being socially ostracised. That works really well. Is it? Are there early modern plays that do what a film like The Innocents does? Are there ghosts that work the way that they do in film, or just films where there's a sort of tension and atmosphere like there is in Longlegs, plays that do that? I don't know. That one's harder to... That's probably the element of horror that I think is most cinematic and hardest to find in theatre. But I don't know, what do you think?
Well, it's funny you should bring this up. So one of the places on my list that I haven't mentioned is, there are lots of versions of this story, of Tancred and Gismunda, which is originally the first iterations that we've got two versions of the same production, one tidied up later on. And it's a student production, and it's clearly by students who've read a lot of Seneca. And it is based on a story from Palace of Pleasure, and it is basically... It's a bit like Duchess of Malfi, and a bit like the later plays Duchess of Malfi and 'Tis Pity She's a Whore, in the sense that you've got someone whose husband has died, she wants to remarry, her father does not want that to happen, she has an affair, and then he murders her lover and delivers his heart in a chalice for her to drink.
Oh, nice.
Which she puts some poison in and kills herself, and then he blinds himself at the end. For extra Oedipal, Senecan
Yes, of course. Yeah.
gore. And we read this play, and it is bonkers in many ways. And there was parts of me going, well, it's a bit over the top, it's a bit stolid. But there are several images in it that leapt out at me. It's all, in fact, being worked by her dead husband who doesn't want her to marry.
Oh.
At the beginning, he has basically sent Vampire Cupid. We call him Vampire Cupid because he's interested in sucking your blood. And he's not a nice Cupid. And early modern Cupids frequently aren't. We haven't talked about Cupid. Cupid as a figure of horror is a really interesting character, actually. He's a really disruptive and dangerous character sometimes, as well as just a mischievous one.
Like fairies often are as
Yes.
well. Much more frightening than we think
Yes.
for early modern people.
So he's effectively sent Vampire Cupid in to make her fall in love, and then her. So he lives in the attic, but in the basement they have
Oh,
Furies.
that's like Hellraiser.
Yeah, and
it's horrible.
But in the basement you have Furies, and the Furies send the father mad by throwing snakes at him. So during one of the interludes, during one of the dumb shows, it could be quite comic, but it also could be done really interestingly. That basically he is writhed in snakes, and then he goes into his daughter's bedroom where it's a slight misreading of what's going on here because he's supposed to be. He basically just hides behind the curtains, but there's a sort of sense of him sniffing the bedclothes in a really creepy way. And I started seeing this play as something like Fire Walk With Me, rather than, because yes, the text is very over the top, but it is full of these images that are really disturbing, and this question of control, and
Yes.
almost this other theme that we could pick up, which is basically the patriarchy as horror.
Yeah.
Which the early modern period delivers so much material.
Yeah, Duchess of Malfi is all that as
Yeah.
well, isn't it? And Duchess of Malfi is fun because it's also a werewolf story.
Yes.
So and I think actually
Brings us to Peter Stuber.
yes, but everything you said about what was that play called again?
Oh, Tancred in
Gisborne is. It made me you're making me think of good productions I've seen of the Duchess of Malfi, where the things about it that are excessive are actually really disturbing because they have to do with psychology.
Yeah.
Like Ferdinand thinking he's a werewolf, it could be played for laughs, but it's actually really messed up, and it's just to do with you can see how he's ended up there, psychologically from what he was like at the beginning of the play, and it's actually becomes this man who is, because you see him sort of in a state of undress, naked, depending on the production, covered in mud. He's been digging up graves. It's almost like Ed Gein. He's gone a bit like there's something really. It's not about the supernatural belief in werewolves at all. We're watching a man go mad and lose his humanity. I think sometimes directors chicken out of those kinds of scenes because they either misinterpret them, they either think, oh, this is a literal werewolf transformation and we just don't want to do it, or they just think it's too silly and too excessive and I don't want to have a modern audience won't accept it. But actually, if you look at horror films, audiences are happy to accept the outlandish as long as the central psychology works. And that one that you just mentioned also makes me think of that Abraham and Isaac story, where what's really frightening is the father poisoned. And this brings me to one of my favourite horror films, The Babadook, where we have a haunted house story which is really about the horrifying idea that a mother might actually deep down want to kill her son because she's so unwell psychologically that he's become the emblem of all that she detests and is upset and has been, everything that's brought her grief. And you can see this kid is alone with a monster, but the monster isn't the creepy thing in the shadows.
Yeah.
And so, of course modern audiences can accept these things. I'd love to see a production of the play. And that one as well makes me think a bit more about the architecture of theatres and how that teaches you something about how you're meant to engage with these more outlandish interventions, if you like. The Furies coming up from below, the thing in the attic above. We've got
I very much see it as a diseased house,
right?
And this question of, is it the father? Is it
yeah,
coming from his
like The Shining, The Shining.
Exactly.
Is it the house,
question,
or was it always in him, and the house has just brought it out?
Yeah. And that how much agency does anyone in this play have?
It's actually really like The Shining. Now that would be a really cool if you did it with people in jumpers in a in a 70s.
It's one of the things that play really kicked me off on a bit of a horror kick, in the sense I said earlier, I've always been a much more science fiction, and there's always a bit of a crossover with science fiction and horror. And it was reading this play of going, well, this first play I've actually thought, I could see this as a film. I mean, we'd cut a lot of the text, but the images in this actually could transpose really interestingly, and I can sort of started collecting images, so I thought I should start watching more horror, and that led to a very lengthy rabbit hole. And same with Beware the Cat to a degree, of actually, yes, I'm doing a stage version, but actually I could maybe not do the whole film, but there are a couple of the episodes would make a really, really good short film.
Yeah.
If you could just figure out how to film the cat. Because this is the problem with cats. It's just like some poor unfortunate cats being thrown by an AED off camera.
But talking about audio, how you're doing a lot of audio adaptations, actually there might be something really rich that you could do with some of these stories with sound, because so the history of sound in horror is very interesting. I don't know if you've seen the film Barbarian Sound. What's it called? Barbarian Sound Studio. That's a great one, because there's this. Well, it's a weird film, but there's a great scene in it where basically you're with a Foley artist whose job it is to do the sound effects for horror films, and he gets given this really gory film, and you watch this scene through him. It's great. You see this film. Because you never
really see the film.
No, it's so much worse.
All you're seeing is him chopping things and making
snapping
the noises.
Carrots and chopping cabbages. And he's not very happy about it. But there's something very visceral about the way that it's almost like he's holding the camera in a snuff film or something. Yeah. He's sort of, you can see him feeling like he's complicit in something really nasty, even though it is supposedly just a film. And anyway, so I think in terms of the sort of visceral nature of sound in horror, you could do some really interesting things translating some of these plays through, I don't know, through audio and special effects. And it's easier to train a cat if it's a sound effect.
This is true. I have ideas of how to do the cat, which largely involves no cats.
But that also very, very clever. It's going to be dogs now. That also kind of makes me think about the unseen, right? The occult, the hidden, the thing that is never actually shown, and theatre can quite powerfully do that. That's an easy trick you can do, is to just not show the monster. So yeah, I mean, do we see snakes, or does he see snakes and we see him seeing snakes? It's lovely.
Well, so we're not really here to come up with a conclusion. We've sort of discussed the complexities, and there'll be a webpage at some point which will outline all of these things and give you links for those who leap in, but with enough caveats to say we don't think this is necessarily right. But it's a way of accessing texts, because we have so many texts, so many plays that we work on, that finding ways to make sure people can find them, which is sort of what genre is for, is to make it easier for people to find us and find plays. If you have thoughts out there for things that could fit within this genre, or things that really shouldn't, then feel free to get in touch with us online. We're all over the various socials at Beyond Shakes. Just send us some passive-aggressive abuse. That's what the internet is for. All that remains is to thank my wonderful guests for being wonderful. Is there anywhere we can find you online, or anything that you're possibly doing in a suitably distant future between us recording this and me actually putting it out?
Yeah, okay, right. Well, I will hopefully still be on Substack by then, so do follow me at Dr. King's Curiosities on Substack, where I write about the history of horror, theatre, magic, storytelling, all sorts of stuff. I'll probably have some sort of plan. I mean, I've got a few things that are going to be happening. Just follow me on Substack and you'll see. I'll post about all the theatre and stuff that's going on. I've got an opera on this year, but I think that's going to be on in March, about witchcraft actually. My first libretto, short libretto, working with a composer at the Royal Academy of Music, but maybe that will be performed again later in the year, so just eyes peeled.
This is the good place for me to put in future recording of my voice to say, otherwise look in the show description, there will be any useful links will be available there. But otherwise, thank you very much, and goodbye.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, hello and welcome to the Beyond. Cat's eating out of the bowl. Do you mind?
just as you started speaking.
It's literally the thing.
I know, they must do.
Yeah, okay. Turn me down a bit.
Was it Oscar Wilde who said, in ancient Egypt, cats were worshipped. They've never forgotten this.
They know, don't you, cat? Okay. Really? Really, mystery? Mystery? You're going to make me bribe you with treats? I think you are. Okay, let me try that introduction again.